Bridging from A to B is always a huge pain. All the bridging happens under the hood over IBC, usually 1 to 2 blocks. You can trade any token in crypto, full stop. Take your ETH yield and buy native Bitcoin with it. Yield on that will natively accrue in Bitcoin. We're embedding these directly into the Stride DEX at launch. 20% of all the revenue that Stride gets to burn Atom and drive value of the whole ecosystem. You all hear me? Perfect. Hey all, I'm Vishal from Stride Labs and one of the co-founders of Stride. I'm here today to talk to you about the IBC flywheel and how we can build a flywheel that will grow Cosmos and the whole ecosystem. So let's jump into it. So the problem today, as I see it, is Cosmos has a ton of innovation. We've seen innovation on all parts of the stack, whether that's the SDK, the IBC layer, the VM layer, and a whole bunch more. But all of these efforts are very disconnected and disparate, and we've seen that there is no unifying vision that the whole ecosystem rose towards. We have 40+ chains in Cosmos, fragmented liquidity, and no good efforts to build a unifying UX, product, or cohesive vision. We need the whole ecosystem to row together in the same direction and for efforts to keep compounding. The solution is to build a flywheel that compounds the growth of the various efforts within Cosmos. Barry and Mag have already done a really excellent job of laying the groundwork for this and putting forth a vision and framework for how different projects in the whole space can row together towards a unified vision. We've seen really good success here so far with projects like TAC and Ripple choosing to build in Cosmos. And we've seen with the proliferation of IBC Eureka and a whole bunch of other tech efforts that there's a unifying vision for everyone to move towards. We want to describe how this flywheel will tangibly grow that ecosystem and how the Cosmos EVM will fit into that vision. So we're going to talk about 3 main things today. First is, what is the flywheel that I'm talking about and how can we kickstart it? The second is Stride. After all, I work at Stride, and how the Stride DEX fits into this whole picture. And lastly, why the Cosmos EVM? There's so many places for protocols to deploy these days. Why might they choose the Cosmos EVM? And in particular, why did we at Stride choose the Cosmos EVM? So let's jump into it and talk first about the flywheel. So this is the flywheel as we see it. We're going to talk through this in more detail. So we're going to start with the hub apps and services. And by this, I mean basically all of the apps and types of ways that people might choose the Cosmos SDK. So just a few examples of this. It might be things like Skip Go that makes transaction routing better on the SDK. It might be things like how fast are blocks, how many transactions can users land per second. But it might also be other applications that developers have access to. So things like DEXs or lending protocols or custodians like Anchorage. There's a whole host of different services and that you might want for your users that will affect where you choose to deploy. So that's, I would say, the first part of the flywheel and the main part of the Cosmos EVM. But once we make a really good set of apps and services on the Cosmos Hub, that leads to a better product, the Cosmos SDK becoming a better product. And that will ultimately lead, I think, to more teams choosing the Cosmos SDK and Cosmos as a place to launch. We've seen this already with TAC and Ripple and a whole bunch of other chains, like Babylon, for example. But here's where the flywheel kicks in. As more of these chains kind of launch in Cosmos, we'll see the overall market greatly expand. So we'll see more users, more revenue, more apps that exist in the space. And that in turn makes the apps better, makes the product better, makes more chains want to develop in the space, and kind of kicks off this virtuous cycle of growth. So we're going to talk more about this. We're going to start with the hub apps and services. So I would say the apps and services is kind of the bedrock of Cosmos and the Cosmos SDK. There's a whole bunch of things that the Cosmos SDK gives chains out the gate, but with the launch of the Cosmos EVM, this is now becoming a fully featured product suite. So what exactly is the hub offering? And I would break it down to 5 different categories for what the hub offers in different Cosmos chains. So first is IBC. IBC, I would say, is a real fundamental innovation and is quite unique in all of crypto. As IBC now is expanded to Ethereum, but soon is going to expand to Base, Solana, Bitcoin, a whole host of different ecosystems. And that allows applications to access liquidity in a whole bunch of different locations. That liquidity is ultimately very useful. If I'm an application developer and I want to choose, should I develop on Ethereum or Solana or Cosmos, what type of liquidity and users I can tap into is ultimately the biggest thing driving my decision. But there's four other parts of the hub apps and service, I would say. The second is scale. So if I develop an application on the hub, part of the product of the hub is it lets me deploy that application all throughout crypto through IBC. And so this type of scale is a really big part of the app and service that the hub offers. The third thing that the hub offers, I would say, is users. So as more and more users start using the various hub applications, any new application that wants to deploy in the hub can instantly tap into those users. The fourth one is better an ecosystem applications. So as lending protocols or stable coins or NFT marketplaces deploy in the hub, every subsequent application that deploys there can tap into this existing vibrant community of applications. And the last thing is just the tech stack. So this is maybe a little bit underrated, but one thing that we've seen from lots of stacks in crypto is you often get very bad technical support, and a lot of tech stacks are riddled with bugs or slow software upgrades and a bunch of other stuff. For the Cosmos SDK, it's been very battle tested, and one thing the hub is really committed to is all Cosmos SDK chains will get a really high degree of technical support and be pretty confident in the in continued support for their product. Okay, so this is a lot, but I'd say this all comprises the core the core product offering that the hub is giving to protocol developers or chain builders who want to deploy in the hub. After all, we're at EVM day, and we're hearing all about different types of applications that are going to deploy in the hub and why they are choosing to do so. But what happens once you have a really great set of apps and services? I think this naturally will lead to more chains and more teams choosing to deploy in Cosmos. We've already seen, like I said, TAC, Babylon, Ripple, and so many more choose to build in Cosmos. And I think trying to break down the reasoning for why teams do this today, they get access to a thriving ecosystem of apps. And they get access to IBC and liquidity and users from Ethereum, Solana, and so many other locations. But most importantly, they can maintain their own sovereignty. See chains like Babylon, who want to deploy really custom, really unique applications, be in control of their future. And there's no other ecosystem that really gives them this opportunity except for Cosmos. As we see more and more chains choose Cosmos due to the sovereignty and the ecosystem that it espouses, I think we lead to a few different things that grow the overall market for Cosmos. So 3 things in particular. First, we see more interesting asset issuance. So we're already kind of seeing this. There are more and more chains and protocols and coins launching in Cosmos, and that extra asset issuance, I think, leads to more exciting opportunities for users. The second thing is, as more and more chains deploy, there's more users and more revenue for existing Cosmos chains to tap into. So, let's say there's 10 really big new Cosmos chains. If I'm deciding to deploy an NFT marketplace in the hub, now I've way more users, way more protocols that might use my product, and that makes it more attractive for me to deploy there. And the last thing that, as we see more Cosmos chains launch, is we can onboard higher and higher quality teams to build in the space. As more and more people are using Cosmos chains, we're going to attract better builders, more funding, more investment, and ultimately leads to this virtuous flywheel that kicks off. So I know we've kind of gone through a lot about this whole cycle of building apps in the hub and teams maybe deciding to build in Cosmos, but it's all a little bit abstract. Let's maybe make it a bit more tangible and talk about one specific example of a team that might want to build anywhere in crypto. So let's take maybe an RWA issuer. So let's say I'm a Florida real estate developer and I want to tokenize my Florida real estate. This is something we're kind of already seeing in a bunch of different chains. This is, I would say, a very practical example of someone that might want to deploy in a different ecosystem. As this real estate issuer, I could choose to deploy in Cosmos, but also I could choose to deploy in Ethereum L1, any of the Ethereum L2s, choose to deploy on Solana. I can make my own chain. There's a whole host of things I can do, and I want to kind of walk through the thought process of how they might choose where to deploy and why they might want to choose to deploy in Cosmos. So I'd say that there's the most important reason for why this type of asset issuer might want to deploy in Cosmos is IBC lets them access users from anywhere. So let's say I'm launching, this Florida real estate. I want to allow people from Ethereum, from Bitcoin, from Solana, from Arbitrum, anywhere, to be in one click, be able to buy my asset. That's ultimately the end thing I care about. I want to have the most users that I can tap into. Really, the only place you can do that today is Cosmos. IBC it really connects to every single ecosystem and allows for seamless onboarding. And I think this is really one of the primary things application developers care about. A number of you in the audience, I'm sure, build applications in crypto, and this is often like the biggest pain point, and it's one of the key things that Cosmos can really solve. The second reason that this type of asset issuer might want to choose Cosmos is there's a permissionless EVM that allows them to be very flexible in the kinds of applications that they build. So for example, I might want to build KYC directly into my RWA, like my real estate. Like I don't want to sell to anyone who's not a US citizen, for example. I also might want to have deprogrammability for things like compliance or things that help me track who is actually owning my asset. This is a set of things that we've heard from real RWA issuers and something they can access in the Cosmos Hub. Next thing, though, I think is also quite important is there's a suite of apps already on the hub that these type of issuers can already plug into. This is not the case if they want to go launch their own sovereign L1, and they often have to do that to get some of the KYC or sovereignty that we talked about. If you launch anywhere in the Cosmos ecosystem, you get access to DEXs, lending protocols, a whole suite of social and other apps, and they can get that with no additional work. And then the last thing that I think is also quite important for this exact example is you can export RWAs. So in particular, let's say I'm this Florida real estate issuer. I want to tokenize RWAs in the hub, but then I want to strike a partnership with someone on Arbitrum, or I want to allow people who own my real estate to do something interesting with it on Solana, or maybe take the yield and put it into Bitcoin. You can't do that in any other ecosystem, full stop. Like if I issued my RWA on Solana, there's no trustless way now to get that RWA over to Ethereum, or trustless way to get that over to Arbitrum, except if you issued it on the Cosmos Hub. Because then you can IBC that fully trustlessly to any other place in crypto. I think this is really pretty game changing, and it's a really, I think, big reason to choose the Cosmos EVM over any other place to deploy an application. So popping back up the stack, we have this flywheel. And I think what I'm hoping to communicate to you is that as the suite of things that, as IBC expands, as the hub adds more and more people like this RWA issuer will choose to deploy in the Cosmos. And that in turn makes the Cosmos larger, makes more and higher quality apps developed, makes more people choose it, and that creates this flywheel and has everyone pushing towards the same outcome in the space. So where exactly does Stride fit into this, though? You know, we've kind of just talked about in the abstract these kind of goals and vision for Cosmos, but maybe let's tie that back to Stride and how Stride fits into this picture. Stride is focused on offering one of the first and foremost services in any crypto ecosystem, which is an exchange. We're hoping that exchange can be a key pillar for this new vision of the Cosmos Hub. So making one tangible example, what's something you can do on the Cosmos Hub with Stride that you couldn't do anywhere else? Sorry, we might be having a slight technical difficulty here, but I can maybe walk you through what this GIF was supposed to show. So one thing that you can do on Stride that really is only possible in the Cosmos Hub is over IBC you can do really cross-chain native things, really embedded into the DEX. So, you know, removing some of that jargon, let's say I have like USDC on Base and I want to DCA into Atom or into Stride over the course of 10 days. You can't really do this anywhere else, especially in a trustless manner, but it's something that over IBC you're able to do on Stride. So this is kind of a mock of the UI, and the GIF would have walked through it. But on top, you can pick the chain that you want to start on. So let's say Base, say how much USDC you want, what token you want to end up buying, Atom, maybe it's on the Cosmos Hub. Maybe you actually want to buy Sol on Solana. It doesn't really matter. And then you put your time. This is something you can do on the Cosmos Hub today that you really can't do anywhere else. And I think it's part of why the Cosmos EVM is so unique. And part of what we're trying to help unlock on Stride. We're trying to be this liquidity layer that will help unify a bunch of these different applications in the Cosmos. So maybe talking a bit more broadly about things that Stride might do, we've tried to identify different pain points that users have in Cosmos, but also just in crypto in general. I'm sure many of you have used a DEX, and there's a whole host of pain points. We're trying to identify what are those pain points you can solve with the Cosmos EVM, and then make that a kind of first-class primitive in the Stride DEX. So hitting some of these, I would say the biggest pain point I see, I personally experience in crypto, is I want to access applications on a bunch of different chains, and bridging from A to B is always a huge pain. It takes like 3 to 4 different websites. Sometimes the bridge doesn't work. You have to wait 10, 20 minutes. You might end up with an asset that's wrapped, and then you have to figure out how to unwrap that asset. It's quite painful and challenging. That's something that the Cosmos EVM makes super easy for you to abstract away and really just solve. And it's something we're going to embed first class in Stride DEX. Any type of bridging on Stride DEX just happens under the hood. So you pick kind of the asset you want to start with, whether it's on Solana or Base or somewhere else, and where you want to end with. And then all the bridging happens under the hood over IBC in a matter of usually 1 to 2 blocks, and you won't even kind of know that you're bridging across different chains. It happens pretty seamlessly. Other thing that we're trying to do to make the bridging UX better, and one thing I've personally experienced is when you bridge across different chains, the transactions often just fail, either because there's some timeout error, or maybe you didn't have enough gas, or something else. We're embedding wallets into the Stride app natively. So when you log in, there's some type of embedded wallet in your browser, and that wallet will guarantee execution of whatever path you're trying to do. So let's say I'm trying to bridge from Ethereum to Solana and trade there. The wallet itself will automatically retry that in the background, and Stride will make sure all the gas and everything works out, and you will guarantee that transaction will execute, barring something really crazy from happening, maybe you set a slippage constraint and that can no longer be met. The second problem we're trying to solve here is liquidity depth and coverage. So one thing we've seen, particularly in new ecosystems, it's very challenging to bootstrap liquidity. If you have a new DEX on a new L1, you have to make sure you have enough liquidity for all the assets you might care about. This is a very hard problem to solve, but I think we have a pretty good approach to solving this, which Stride's going to tap into native liquidity on a bunch of different DEXs and a bunch of different ecosystems using skip go. So what does this mean? Let's say I am a user and I want to go to Stride and I want to buy Sol from ETH. We can route that through the Cosmos Hub and through Stride, but let's say past a certain point, there's not enough liquidity to meet your order. We'll just route the excess order to different DEXs on Ethereum and Solana to give you a good execution price for your final trade. This really prioritizes the end user experience and makes sure that there's sufficient liquidity from your perspective to execute kind of arbitrary size swaps. And in the back end, Stride gets as much volume from that as we think is feasible. This, I think, really does solve a key pain point. It's, again, really only possible over IBC and the Cosmos EVM, because you can route this transaction over IBC in a way that isn't really possible before. The last pain point that we've seen on a bunch of DEXs is that there aren't really advanced orders like you might expect on a centralized exchange, things like limit orders or stop loss or fill or kill. And especially these aren't available cross-chain, if you want to do assets that aren't on one chain. We're embedding these directly into the Stride DEX at launch. In a really multi-chain fashion. So you can do things like limit orders or fill or kill across Bitcoin, Solana, ETH, et cetera, kind of directly natively at launch. So tying this maybe into how Stride is going to fit into the Cosmos Hub, our goal is to really enable Hub DeFi through the set of features in this DEX that we just talked about. We're hoping this is a really novel and interesting primitive for people, for the whole ecosystem, and that will allow lots of other apps to be built on top of Stride. So for example, all major applications developing in the Hub right now are partnering with Stride, and we're hoping to have really deep integrations with all these protocols day one. So that might be a lending protocol, that might be a vault partner, that might be NFT marketplace, and we're trying to have really custom native integrations to all these protocols. The second one I think is really important is we're working with all the IBC chains to allow seamless onboarding for their chain and ecosystem. So say that might be Babylon, we're trying to make it so you can one-click onboard at Babylon or any other ecosystem as easy and seamlessly as possible. And the last thing on this note is we're trying to prioritize liquidity for any IBC chain, especially Eureka customers. So this is chains like Injective, DYDX, Babylon, and a whole host of more. We're trying to make sure that it's really first class on Stride to allow those type of chains to really tap into the Hub ecosystem. And then, popping this up the stack one more, our goal is to really grow the Hub pie and make the Cosmos Hub as full-featured of a DEX, of an ecosystem as possible. So this is going to be deep liquidity to allow other primitives in the Cosmos Hub. It's going to be onboarding users to the Cosmos Hub and allowing those users to access all types of applications in the Hub. And last and most importantly, we're going to use 20% of all the revenue that Stride gets to burn Atom and drive value to the whole ecosystem. We hope this is a mechanism that other applications in the Hub will adopt. This is a way to really drive and align incentives across every application in the Cosmos. So we talked about the flywheel, talked about how Stride DEX plays a part of it. Last thing I want to end on and leave you all with is why the Cosmos EVM. And in particular, what are things that you can do in the Cosmos EVM that you couldn't do anywhere else? We've touched on this at different points in this talk, but I want to give like 3 really clear and crisp examples. And if there's only one thing you get away from this talk, I want it to be these 3 examples of what you can do on the Cosmos EVM. So we'll start off. You can trade on one DEX. You can trade any token in crypto. Full stop. This is something that you really can't do anywhere else. It's quite hard to do, especially in a permissionless way. Other protocols try to do this, end up having lots of centralized intermediaries. But over IBC and the Cosmos EVM, you can allow your users to tap into any token on any chain that's connected to IBC. So this might be Base, Solana, and Ethereum at launch, but the IBC team is hard at work on expanding IBC to all the ETH2s, to different types of VMs, to even like Dino chains like Bitcoin or Litecoin or stuff like that. IBC is proliferating, it's open source, and its expansion has been ever growing. And now on the Cosmos EVM, you can tap into all those chains fully natively. So as an example, you can swap like Pepe to WIF fully natively in a decentralized way. That's one thing you can do in the Cosmos EVM that you really can't do anywhere else. The second thing is cross-chain DCA. I think, as far as I know, this is truly not possible today. If you have native Bitcoin or native ETH and you want to DCA that into Sol, let's say, over the course of a couple days, you really can't do that in crypto today. But with the primitives exposed by the Cosmos EVM, this is possible right now. You can do more sophisticated cross-chain things, like a limit order, like I want to buy Sol if it falls 10% relative to ETH. The last thing that the cross-chain DCA I think is really quite unique and very novel. Let's say you have ETH and you want to take your ETH yield and buy native Bitcoin with it. You can deposit your ETH into a vault on the Cosmos Hub. That'll convert it to STETH, and then your yield on that will natively accrue in Bitcoin. This is something that I think really is quite cool and novel. Really unifies a lot of ecosystems, and it's a clear example of what you can do on the Cosmos EVM. The last thing you might be able to do on the Cosmos EVM is cross-chain leverage. So we're working with a lending partner on the Cosmos Hub to integrate lending directly into Stride DEX. And this will allow you to borrow native assets against one another in a very trustless way. So for example, you can borrow Bitcoin against Sol, ETH, ARB, etc. And you might even be able to trade those assets against one another with leverage. Something that, again, is a really cool feature of the cross-chain nature of the Cosmos EVM. So just to recap, we talked about the flywheel and how the whole ecosystem can now kind of row in the same direction. We talked about the Stride DEX and some of the new functionality that we're trying to offer. And we talked about 3 unique things that the Cosmos EVM offers today. But I want to emphasize, this is just the beginning. I would say this whole vision of connect everything and the Cosmos EVM is the first stepping stone to unify the whole ecosystem and paint a picture or paint a kind of vision that everyone can work towards. And this lays the groundwork for Atom to become a really first-class, world-class protocol. But I would say we're still working and are going to unveil a 10-year 100x vision that we can really work towards, that can really build on top of Connect Everything to become a really quite useful crypto primitive. The analogy I've been using internally is, so right now Cosmos is like in the crawling phase. It's just kind of figuring out the ropes, figuring out PMF, finding a vision for it to get to. And Barry and Mag and the whole ICF have done a really fantastic job of finding a vision and a set of products that give PMF. And now I would say Cosmos is in the walking phase. And our goal is to continue this growth as an ecosystem and in a few years start flying. Thank you.